I'm Wendy Smith. I'm Deputy Executive Director of Housing Programs here at Kentucky Housing Corporation.
Lana Brown, Deputy Executive Director of the Office of Energy Policy, representing Secretary Rebecca Goodman of the Energy Environment Committee.
Kathy Finkelsteller, proxy for Commissioner Matt Sawyers of the Department for Local Government.
Craig Brock, Executive Director for Bell Whitley Community Action Agency in Highland, Kentucky.
Michael Gardner, Director of Housing Production at Rebound Inc., Louisville, Kentucky.
Frederick Government Jr., Enforcement Branch Supervisor with the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights.
Olivia McCowan, Public Affairs Director, Home Builders Association of Kentucky.
Rob Jones, CEO of Audubon Area Community Services. We're based out of Owensboro. We do housing in Davis and Ohio counties.
Mike Turner with the Housing Authority of Burkesville.
David Allgood with the Center for Accessible Living in Louisville. I have to give kudos to Wendy for her presentation yesterday at the Housing Task Force, where she enlightened a lot of legislators about the need for affordable housing. So excellent job.
Logan Haynes, Executive Director of the Kentucky Manufactured Housing Institute.
Brandon Smith, Kentucky State Senator.
Buddy Kittle, Stockton Mortgage, also representing the Mortgage Bankers Association of Kentucky.
Brian Perry, Kentucky Department of Education, proxy for Commissioner Fletcher.
Tracy Jackson, Executive Advisor, proxy for Secretary Freelander, Cabinet for Health and Family Services.
And Lisa Lee Williams, Chief of Staff for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, onboarding Tracy in the role.
Jennifer Decker, I'm a member of the House of Representatives from Shelby County. Also run 2 homeless shelters for women and children. I have to getting ready to double, if not triple, our housing space.
Ann Price with People's Self-Help Housing.
You want to do the back of the room? Well, I'm Molly Tate, the Director of Communications and Marketing.
Nathan Hall, also in Communications and Marketing.
Adrian Bush, not in Communications and Marketing. I'm with the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky.
Curtis Stauffer, Managing Director, Housing Contract Administration for KHC.
My name is Sharon Cornelison. I'm the Director of Housing at the Consumer Federation of America in Washington, D.C. and visiting this week.
Brandon Harley, Audubon Area Community Services.
David Lloyd, Kentucky Transportation Cabinet.
Thank you. Is anyone here who is a member of the general public who would like to present or speak on an issue? All right, thank you. If everyone could please take a moment and review the minutes. After they've been reviewed, if there could be a motion and a second to approve them, and if you could please state your name so that we're sure to get them for the minutes.
Lisa Lee Williams, I'll make a motion that the minutes be approved with 2 exceptions. There's a misspelling on page 2 for completion. And on page 3, first full paragraph, it says the light heat monies come from the Cabinet for Health and Family Services and may be sued. Oh, with those pots of deal. So just clarification on that statement. To be used. Very good.
David Allgood, I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Next, we wanted to take a moment just to remember a longtime member of HPAC, Dr. Abraham Williams. He died last week, and he had served as Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Bowling Green for 29 years, and was seen by many as being a true pillar in this community. He's often credited with cleaning up the housing authority and really had a vision of what the housing could be and became to be known as a legend. I didn't know him personally, but if someone did and wanted to share a few thoughts or memories, I'd welcome you to share them.
Well, I guess in honor of me, Abraham, Abraham was my mentor and really good friend. He did a phenomenal job of showing you that you could reach the stars. One of the programs that he was most proud of was called his ROPE program. And he had raised nearly $900,000 just to promote that program. He presently was working on the project and he had 40 new houses under construction. He had built and sold over 100 houses. Had a program called Reach and Reach Higher, where he took people during the 80s and 90s that was in the welfare program, put them to work at the housing authority. At one time, he had a grant that he figured out that there was a need for transportation. So he actually had a grant where he put the participants in that program in a brand new vehicle, which he had to scrap because they wouldn't adhere to the guidelines. But I could go on and on. He has a mobile grocery that has taken on a whole new dynamic in the state of Kentucky. He was awarded by under the Trump administration for his vision for their learning center. It became a HUD initiative that was labeled the Envision Center. So I could go on and on with things that Abraham has been able to accomplish. He's known throughout the South Central region of housing. Phenomenal guy, and will be truly missed in the area of housing.
And my limited experience was that Abraham was incredibly innovative and really saw beyond just the mission of being a public housing executive director, but other elements that would benefit his community and the residents in the public housing units. I listen to the Western Kentucky Public Radio station where I live. It comes in best. And so there were many, many often community stories about what the housing authority was doing that was innovative and helpful in Bowling Green.
Now we'll top that off with just one last thing. He has got a business is opening up now. It's called his incubator business. And he took an old abandoned grocery store and has rehabbed it and has 10 minority business startups in it. And he's given a $10,000 startup grant for those. His plan was to grow those individuals so that their businesses would outgrow that space and he would rotate somebody else into that space. So that's something that's happening as we speak, and it is a very exciting thing. And also the amount of community development that he's done has been a game changer for Warren County.
Next, we'll hear from Whitney Finstrom about KHC's consolidated plan for the HUD formula allocations.
Hi, everyone. Can you see me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to do a quick presentation. We had a fuller presentation right now. Everyone's got a busy schedule, so I'm just going to try to move right through, because really the key part here is we want to hear what folks on the Housing Policy Advisory Board have to say. So thanks for having me today. I'm with the Cloudburst Group. I'm the project manager working on the consolidated plan for KHC in the Commonwealth. And we're also working on a analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, or fair housing plan, I should say. I'm going to just kind of quickly move through these slides, if you don't mind. Yeah, the goal is just to really have a brief conversation.
Whitney, is it possible for you to go into presentation mode? We're seeing your, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you see that?
Perfect.
Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm just going to quickly go through, because all of you know what's going on out in the field. I don't need to tell you. And I think I recognize a number of names of people we've met with in the last couple of weeks. And we're meeting with folks at the end of this week, the Kentucky Interagency on Homelessness. So thanks for that opportunity. So as you can imagine, one of the key feedbacks, inputs that we received from, you name it, the Kentucky Affordable Housing Coalition and the Kentucky League of Cities, is the issue of affordable housing, right? So, you've heard a lot about that, and we're fortunate that we are able to take some of the information from the phase 1 and phase 2 reports that KHC have conducted with Bowen and that Wendy Smith presented at yesterday, I believe it was. So lots of great information, and we're going to be able to leverage that to create the consolidated plan. I do want to just kind of move right through to sort of briefly explain what these two documents are and then get to questions. So we're working on two things, as I mentioned. One is a consolidated plan. This is required by HUD every 5 years to receive federal funds that the Commonwealth and KHC receives to create affordable housing, to do community development, to provide public social services. So it's a proposed funding strategy. And the first part of the document is what we call a needs assessment, right? So it lays out the needs, in particular housing needs, right? So lots of data from the recent studies that really quantify that issue. And then we do a number of consultations, which we've done a number of across the Commonwealth, and we have a few coming up as well, that helps to layer in some of the dynamics that are going on for us to understand what's going on in Eastern Kentucky versus Western Kentucky versus rural, urban, and so on. And then at the end, the document creates a proposed funding strategy for these funds, right? Just to go over them briefly, that's CDBG, it's a Community Development Block Grant Funds, which people are probably very familiar with. Home funds, which are to create affordable housing. ESG, which is Emergency Solutions Grant Funds for homelessness. HOPWA, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. And HTF, which is the Housing Trust Fund. The reality in this current environment is that funding has been fairly flat for a lot of programs, bump up during COVID, and then it's kind of dropped back down. And no matter what happens in Washington in the next year or 2 or 5 years, 4 years, these funds are not likely to increase greatly, right? So, and the home program in particular is seeing a bit of a dip, I think about 20% dip from the previous year. So tighter resources, right? The more difficult market and issues concerning supply chain issues, right? And finding contractors and funding and so on. There's that piece. The other part is that we're also working on an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, which is called an AI for short. And what that is we look at policies. What are some of the current policies around fair housing within the Commonwealth? So we met with the commission, a Fair Housing Commission, and we've met with the Housing Alliance and a couple different groups to really understand, what some of the current issues are and to look at the data that they're able to provide. So it's trying to get the whole picture. So 2 documents. And just to also give you a quick idea, we're in the early third to middle part of this process for both these documents. Stakeholder engagement, data, love data. We look at a lot of data. Love the stuff from Bowen and KHC that they did on needs, housing gaps. That helps us to identify the needs. And then we are in the process right now creating a draft document, and then it'll go on display. I'm jumping ahead, but it goes on public display for 30 days, and there will be public hearings. When those will happen, we don't know exactly, because that is dependent upon when Congress and the president agree on a budget. Of course, with an election year coming up, we don't know when that'll be. This past year, it didn't happen until May of 2024 that Kentucky and other funding recipients received notification of their HUD funding levels, right? So, you know, you got to figure probably May of next year is when the funds will be known. Could be earlier. Hard to tell. A lot out of our control. The assessment of fair housing, as I mentioned, is more policy oriented, and we're digging through those policy pieces now. I'm gonna jump right through. We're lots of background information that you're very familiar with from the recent presentations that have been done. And I do want to get to the discussion and to hear from folks. I know we've only got like maybe 10, 15 minutes here, but you know, one of the things that uniformly we've heard from all different agencies, different agency types, nonprofit, private, more government oriented, you know, is the issue around affordable housing needs and how to address those needs. So I just want to kind of put these questions out as starting points. If you have any other comments that you wanted to provide, you know, please do. Does anyone want to open it up with any discussion or ideas about some of the unique affordable housing needs from your perspective, the department agency perspective?
This is David Allgood. I'm the accessible harbor, I guess. When you say affordable, I would also like to say accessible, because people with disabilities are in dire need of affordable and accessible housing as well. And that is something that's oftentimes is, I think, maybe thought about, but not really carried out to the extent that I think that it would be beneficial to a large number of people in the state.
Definitely appreciate that comment. Yeah, we were fortunate to meet last week with a couple of disability rights organizations, so that was definitely a topic. From your various perspectives, I mean, is anybody, anything else anyone wanted to add to that comment that was provided?
Yeah, this is Cedric with the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. We met with your group probably about a week ago. We talked about accessibility, our highest numbers of cases being disability with the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights, as we serve all 120 counties. I just had a question. Did you receive the documentation regarding case numbers? Have you received that yet from us?
We have not. We received a preliminary report, but I'm not sure if it quantified all of that. So
I'll follow up to make sure. I'll follow up.
Okay, appreciate it.
I guess another one would be lack of funding and then zoning issues as well.
Or not to pick on any particular areas, since you mentioned zoning, is there a particular area that you think we might need to take a closer look at in terms of zoning? Is that too loaded?
I can only say in Louisville that like over 70% is zoned for single family dwelling. So that's pretty prohibitive for 2, 4, 6 units to be able to be built. So there's a huge barrier there where you can't, all you can build is single family units. So it's quite the challenge to say the least.
Yeah, thank you. Just as some background in terms of the second question, barriers exist to address affordable housing. And we have, you know, met with affordable housing developers and others, but, you know, are there barriers that you would like to, additional barriers you'd like to bring up in terms of development, you know, available land for development, financing, labor, capital? Well, the other question, you know, given some of the natural disasters that have happened in many different locations across the country, but, you know, Kentucky certainly, and this may be a leading question, but, you know, how have some of these natural disasters, hazards and disasters impacted affordable housing stock in Kentucky? And are there particular areas of Kentucky where has had a much greater impact?
I think it's made it more difficult for us because my area is a hazard. And before we had a housing crisis, before the flood hit us, we already, that existed. But then after the flood, when you dump 14 to 20 inches of water on a place at 18 hours, then what happens is your home on top of a mountain that has no stream or any riparian area on it whatsoever can have somebody above them, their tractor and a trampoline get caught in a culvert. And then it builds up and causes a 10-foot wall of water to come down the holler, washing everything out below it. So when people were going back in to FEMA and other places to get funding or get help or to try to rebuild, as soon as they said they were flooded, they were told they had to go back to high ground or onto another area, even though there's not even a water source next to that home. But because it had been flooded, it was now taken off the table. And you could go until NOAA returns, and that place may never be flooded again. So it's an unlikely spot. It's not near a river. And Adrian knows what I'm talking about. Some of these places are literally at the top of the mountain. They just happen to have a terrible storm cell hit them. So we've now taken those off the chessboard, and we've tried to put people back on strip property. But you've got some areas that literally still have water and sewer there, but the home got washed away. So we're starting back from scratch, and we're taking places off that I would feel completely, I live on top of a hill, but I could have gotten hit the same way. So I think it's exacerbated the problem we already had with the limited resources and spots that we have for building. And now you've taken some off that these homes have been there for, well, their deeds are actually Fincastle, Virginia. So they're so old. They were there when we were part of Virginia. And now you can't rebuild there because this terrible weather,
Or some failure of infrastructure
Yes.
led to, the damage.
Do you, just to take off on that, I mean, do you think there needs to be more resources put towards resiliency? All these terms that are hot now, but like resiliency planning or kind of planning for potential infrastructure issues related to hazards, environmental, natural hazards?
I do. We were just in the process of going back and revamping the 100-year floodplain, which is really funny that this happened. And after all the years, there has been some development. And in the mountains, a lot of the areas near low-lying areas, which are by streams. And so we were literally looking at going back and maybe changing the 100-year floodplain. Now this has happened. I do think the General Assembly should go back and get a much more detailed study about what happened to see if we could free up some of these properties that are now deemed to be, in flooded areas, but are literally 1,800 feet up on a hill without having a stream, and see if we couldn't come up with a mechanism to get these places insured again, or to make that so that's just not lost. Because to run the water and sewer up on top of these mountains was extremely expensive, because we have to pump the water up the hill, but then you also have to slow it down coming down the other side. So just to get it 4 miles in the mountains would cost you as much as maybe a whole neighborhood. So I hate to see that all lost because we fought so hard to get there. But it will take some intelligent thought about how to go back and clear that up so that you could build on it again.
And that also affects, you mentioned insurance, but I mean, even from the building side, it affects the building code process, and that you have to have more engineers involved because it's now considered in a floodplain, which say the word engineer, it's $1,000. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, you've definitely touched on it. In the consolidated plan itself, a couple of years ago, I added a section on hazard mitigation and its impact on housing, primarily affordable housing. And that I think is an evolving section of the document, but anyway, I appreciate that input. I just want to be respectful of your time. How much do I have? A couple more minutes, or?
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Okay, great. So speaking of crises, health-wise, did the end of the pandemic funding and the end of the federal rental, the Treasury Department's program, ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Did you see a great impact on that change in terms of the programs and the people that you serve? Increased demand for services, homes, no real change?
I work with people who are homeless, and we definitely saw more people able to be housed because of the programs. And so, yes, fewer people are able to be housed now that those programs have ended.
We also saw that. We had rooms, we used to have, or we still do now, again, since the end, we have waiting lists where we try to find. But we did not have that during those programs, but it started again the day they stopped.
I can speak from the KHC administered emergency rent assistance during the pandemic. And it was very broad and not hard to access. And we got $260 million out, mainly paid to landlords and utilities during that time. So it prevented a tidal wave of evictions across the state. And we were really happy to have done that. We still have a little bit of that funding left, but we're using it via a much more narrow court-based program. So people who are actually in eviction court, if their landlord will accept rent assistance, it will keep them from being evicted. If their landlord elects to evict, we are allowed to give them a relocation voucher that will help them with a deposit and 1 or 2 months rent, which we're really glad to be able to do that. That will end in less than a year. That's just the timing of the money. And I know that the judges, in particular, in the courts that we're participating in, we have staff that sit in virtual or in real life, in person, in some courtrooms, that those judges are going to be very disappointed when the program ends, because it's been a great way to keep people housed or give people an option to get rehoused if they do get an eviction. But we've managed to keep a lot of folks from getting that eviction on their record at all, which is huge, because an eviction stays on your record forever and follows you longer than a credit, longer than a bankruptcy, follows you on your credit report. So that will be, for us as an organization, but also for all the courts that we work in, it'll really stink when that winds down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Just to wrap it up, I did want to point out, I put my email in the chat. It may look huge for you guys, I don't know. But that way, if you have any questions or comments, 10 minutes from now, you may say, gosh, I wish I had mentioned this. Or if you're feeling shy today, doesn't look like a shy group, but do send me any reports or any other thoughts you might have. Do feel free to send me an email. And I think it was, as was mentioned, we had the fortune to meet with a couple of folks on here, and we have a couple of meetings coming up with a couple of people, I believe, on here. So, we're looking forward to that. As I mentioned, one of the other components is fair housing. And I do want to touch on it briefly, just give me a couple minutes. Again, it's sort of a general question, but what barriers do you think exist to accessing housing and or services? And, the particular protected classes you think it's impacting, is it impacting more seniors or persons with disabilities, or any thoughts about that?
Definitely people with disability. Like I said, which is one of the biggest protected classes that we actually investigate in our cases. People with disability is big as far as that goes. As far as, now, I don't know if you remember our conversations last week, but training, getting out information regarding fair housing training is big. You do have other programs in the state like the Kentucky Fair Housing Council and things like that that do training. I'm going to your second question, Banner, sorry. But these are things that we hit. I don't want to say too much because we talked about this with you already, we being the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. But yeah, so don't want to be too redundant with you, but definitely getting out there and educating around the counties.
I appreciate it. Yeah, that was a good conversation we had. Thank you. Well, I don't want to take any more time. I know everybody's got tons of stuff to do, right? As I mentioned, there, and unfortunately, we don't know when, but there will be public hearings coming up. Probably in late winter, early spring. And all what triggers it is the federal funding. Once Congress and the president agree to a budget, and then it trickles down to HUD, and then HUD, lets Kentucky know. Then that kind of is the marching orders to make this thing really finalize it, right? So we sort of have a roadmap, and we know the funding is likely to be similar to last year. We don't know for sure. But anyway, the document, the consolidated plan, and the fair housing study will both be on public display. You will get a egram, is that the name right? Probably from KC. Yeah, as to when that will be, when it's available on the website and when the public hearings will be. So I guess best I can say is stay tuned, for when that will happen. And yeah, I want to thank you for your time today. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do have any thoughts, comments, feel free to please send it to the email that I posted. I'm looking forward to meeting with a few folks in the next week or two.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Take care.
And next, we'll hear from David Allgood and Curtis Stauffer about supporting more accessible units.
Thank you very much, everyone. It'll be very informal, and I'll try to be brief about the need. And I think reiterated, I would hope that sometime in the future, or currently the present future, hopefully we can start using the word affordable, accessible housing when we talk about affordable housing, because again, the largest minority in Kentucky and the largest minority in America are people with disabilities. So we've got 61 million Americans with disabilities and over 1.2 million Kentuckians with disabilities. So it's a large number of individuals. ARP says that there are going to be 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day for the next 4 years. So the likelihood that they will acquire a disability is somewhat high. With the physical disability, but still some need might arise for those individuals. The program where I work at the Center for Accessible Living in Louisville, we're a Center for Independent Living. Our #1 requested program, which has been on hiatus for almost a year now because of the lack of what we believe is an inventory of accessible homes in Louisville, is help with Section 8 vouchers and emergency vouchers. And we've not been able to help anybody for over a year because there's no inventory for anyone to go. They're usually in West or South Louisville, and literally a number of the people we have served for years, they get in there and they stay there for the rest of their lives because they have nowhere else to go. And the only way a unit comes available is someone passes away or someone moves. So it's a very daunting and challenging proposition for someone to find accessible housing. And as he was talking about the land, the only land really that we have that is out east, and that's more affluent in Louisville and more costly. And there's no bus lines that go out that way. So it's very inhospitable for people with disabilities to try to be able to go out there. And there is a lot of NIMBY in that area as well, to say the least. So that's a huge effort that we are trying to, I'm hoping that some of the collective minds in here can give us some ideals or bring awareness to the situation that is going to be a dire situation for everyone. We have a lot of aging caregivers in Kentucky that provide over $1 billion of caregiving that the state would have to pick up of these individuals to get out of their homes, and these aging parents will not be able to care for these individuals for the rest of their life. So if they go to an institution, you're looking at $70,000, $80,000, $200,000 to keep these individuals in the institution, versus if we already had a built environment where we had accessible homes, then we could do much better quality of life, first and foremost, but also tremendous savings to the taxpayers in our state. Just a little bit about myself. When I was 16, some friends and I were horsing around in a backyard pool. We flung each other in. It was my turn to be flung. I hit my chin on the bottom of the pool, and then I was instantly paralyzed. So that was 42 years ago. And I've been very fortunate to be able to get where I've been to in the last 42 years. So literally, when I got to rehab, I was pulled up and down 6 steps in the basement because that was my larger bathroom downstairs as well as the bedroom. But then I was fortunate enough to be able to start driving my own vehicle. You have to drive from a power chair, and you can't lift a power chair up and down steps. It's quite heavy. It's about 400 pounds. So, I had to go upstairs and literally to get to my bedroom, I had to take the leg rest off. Someone had to grab the compromised pants and I had to back down the hallway to make the turn because I could not get in my bedroom with my leg rest on. So that was a challenge for me. And I had tremendous support from my family, which a lot of people unfortunately don't have. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And then I was really fortunate to be able to hook up with a program that KHC had back in 97 or 98, where it gave me a 1% loan to build a home. I was able to build that home and it was totally and fully accessible. And it was a great program that benefited, and I know another few people that have benefited from that program were able to buy condos, build some other homes as well. But that program hasn't been around for quite some time. And there are no other really funding sources that I'm aware of that can help to that extent. But it was a great program. But again, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about now, you may not think may impact you now, but we're the only minority that doesn't discriminate. You can become a member anytime. No matter if you're male, female, black, white, Democrat, Republican, you can join us. We're free and fair and open. And hopefully it doesn't happen, but a loved one or family member, the probability is somewhat high that will happen to you all. So again, studies have shown people want to stay in their home. It's more cost effective and much more better quality of life. So anything that we can do to encourage private builders. I mean, I've met with Louisville Homeowners Association and the Kentucky Homeowners Association and talked about some of these issues, and they were always hesitant about more restrictions and more things that they had to comply with. And if you think of a couple that just worked for 30 years and finally were able to retire, and then one of them has a stroke, now they have to, if they can modify the house because of the low burn wall, they'll have to take out a second mortgage and have to hopefully be able to stay where they're at. If we started building homes with these inclusivity options, that would be so much better off for all of us ever do. I've just tried for years. Went to the Homeowners Association here in Frankfurt, and I guess I didn't tell them that I was in a wheelchair, so there's a step to get in the door. So they had to pop me up to get into the building, and there's still the dialogue didn't go very far. That was probably 6 or 7 years ago. So anywhere that we can raise awareness to individuals, I would be happy to help. And I encourage you sometimes to Google the word visitability. It's all one word, visitability. It's a program that started down in Douglasville, Georgia. A lady who's going around and seeing a new development go up, and she was a wheelchair user, and so there were steps that would preclude her from visiting the homes. So it's a concept. Some of it's voluntary, but some of it's mandatory in building code, where you have to have 0-step threshold entrance, a 4-foot hallway, and a bathroom on the first floor with a 5-foot turning radius. So it's someone who uses a power or manual wheelchair to visit you. Because by show of hands, who has at least one step to get in their house in this room? Okay, well, so I'm not visiting any of you all anytime soon. So there is an issue that a lot of us with disabilities face every day in trying to get to in and out of homes, because it's a practical option for us to be able to take advantage of. So anything that we can do to create awareness, and I would love to see if we could get the state building code changed, because Louisville can't supersede the state building code when we try to require more accessible units on the first floor. I'd love to see us maybe try to go above and beyond what just the fair housing minimum requirements are, so that we can have more when they're building a new building, that we have those accessible units on the first floor or second floor if there's a elevator available. So I would love for us to maybe focus on that issue as well, to try to change the state building code to allow local municipalities to be able to go above and beyond that, so that they can create, which is a very, very dire and needed option for people with disabilities throughout our state. And I appreciate your time.
I will just add that Charles brought this to myself, and we had a conversation with some of our program people, and remind me of the organization that's out of UK. Justin Jeter was part of it, and
the Commonwealth Council of Developmental Disabilities. Yes,
they were part of the conversation too. And we talked about how could KHC look at its own policies to try to incentivize more accessible units for first floors, maybe even some accessory dwelling units that are accessible for some independent living, but maybe behind a family home.
the last unit occupying after two. So depending on when it was built and the last person occupying the unit, we could look into that. So that's something as well, especially new units and also public accommodation as well. If they are not accessible to those who have disabilities, that's something we can look into as well. Our job is to try to fix, not try to get people. So we can look into that as well.
Appreciate that. We've used you all in the past.
I think this is not dealing with housing, but it is. And I think that there's an option that could look at design of wheelchairs and the equipment that would be outriggers or whatever that could be attached to that to help with eliminating some of the hurdles of getting into a first step home. So when I sit here and I look at this wheelchair, I'm thinking, okay, there are some design builds that could change the equipment that's on this that could help with that situation pretty easy. So that's another piece that I think could be explored.
You're just gonna, did you have anything you wanted to? Oh, all right, that's good.
Good afternoon, everybody. Curtis Stauffer, again, KHC's Managing Director of Housing Contract Administration. Amongst one of my duties is I oversee the team that does single-family homebuyer development projects. And in the context of what David was just talking about, I just wanted to provide a brief overview about where KHC stands in terms of what we require of our builders in terms of accessibility requirements. And I will offer the caveat that we are better than most, but we are not perfect. We've got a long way to go to best meet the needs of persons with disabilities across the Commonwealth. Hopefully, once we get a little more fully staffed on our design and construction review team, we'll be looking at reevaluating our design standards over the course of the next year or so. So there will be opportunity for public input to help us revise these documents to state how we can better meet the needs of folks with disabilities by implementing accessibility requirements for housing that we fund. The next slide. For our single family new construction programs, we're currently using our 2019 minimum design standards. And basically what happens is all of our developers have to submit their plans to our design and construction review team before they're allowed to build a house. And we review those plans for adherence to these criteria that we've established. And we go well beyond what is required of single family housing by federal and state accessibility law, which is nothing, to ensure that we not only have units that can be accessible, but also that will allow people to age in place, because we really see ourselves as providing a permanent housing solution to folks that can hopefully accommodate them in all aspects of their lives. Can you go to the next slide, please? So these are just some of the standards we include to increase the accessibility of our units. We have wider interior doors and hallways that they have to meet at least minimum widths to allow passability for persons utilizing wheelchairs. There has to be at least one usable bedroom and a universally designed bathroom on grade level so that folks can age in place in the house and or be visited by folks with limited mobility. We ensure that bathroom approaches are accessible, and our design standards mandate that if grab bars are not pre-installed, the mounts are pre-installed to allow them to be safely installed should somebody wish to install them after their home is constructed. We ensure the front porch is within a certain distance from the interior floor, so we have no step up for the main entryways. We have shorter stair risers where stairs are in place on entry to make ease of access and slope shorter, so ramps can be easily installed. We also required some pre-installed supports in manufactured housing units and lever handled faucets and doorknobs, so folks can access those easily in the homes, regardless of their disability status. Let's see. So these are door hardware. So on the flip side, if you go to the next slide, in our multifamily housing world, this has a lot more adherence and compliance that's required with federal law, particularly as it relates to the ADA, Section 504, and the Universal Federal Accessibility Standards. And those requirements are imposed by the units count in a development. So basically, our fair housing laws apply, and our design and construction review team does the same pre-review of multifamily plans that we do for our single-family plans to ensure compliance with these federal and local requirements, including the Kentucky Code and those federal standards just discussed. One thing we do that goes above and beyond these requirements is we work to ensure that all indoor and outdoor amenities are universally accessible. One thing you might not think about is, say you've got a picnic bench next to an outdoor playground in an apartment building. We require that next to that picnic bench, there is a concrete platform, so somebody utilizing a wheelchair has a place to sit and hang out comfortably and safely. That's a bit of extra cost we impose on developers, but per our design and construction team, we're not hearing anybody complain about having to do that. Just a bit of common sense when you think about simple things you can do to ensure that our newly constructed units are more broadly accessible. If you have 5 more units for new construction or 15 more units for rehab, we have to meet the federal uniform accessibility standards, which are a little more stringent than some of the other requirements specified in the list of regulations described in the list there above. And again, we make sure that we have in our use of materials and amenities in the units. Our minimum design standards have some universal design goals that equates to cabinet materials and reach that's in the cabinets that are installed in units, be those accessible units or not. And similarly to our single family requirements, we do establish wider interior and exterior door requirements. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we do on a daily basis and looking at what we're building here at Kentucky Housing right now, but also saying we are going to have the opportunity to make this more stringent, more aggressive, and more accessible in the future as we look to revise our design guidelines for both single family and multifamily development over the course of the next year or so. Any questions? Oh, and if you do have specific questions related to any of these guidelines, they're available on our website. So if you just search universal design guidelines or minimum design standards, it'll bring you to those. And if you have specific questions, you can reach out to Dale Spicer on our design and construction review team, because he's our expert for review and implementation of those policies.
Curtis just pointed out it's easy somewhat to do, and he hasn't had much pushback from developers to do that. So, I mean, if we could get builders to do this, and again, if you already block the wall, you don't have to make the grab rail there yet, but if you do need it in the future, it's there if you wanted to do it. If you have the wider turning radius in the bathroom there in the beginning, and hopefully you would maybe have a den or at least maybe even a bedroom on the first floor that could be accessible for those individuals, you'd be coming out a lot better in the beginning and the end. It costs, I mean, what I've heard, and it's less than 2% of the increases the cost of the build. I could be wrong, you're all better at that than I am. But and the last thing is several years ago in Louisville, there's a home around every year where they build the new homes and the builders show off the thing, and they had it in Norton Commons. It was going to be the best thing ever. You got Asian place, phenomenal. You have your grocery there, you got your barber, your salon, you got the bar, the restaurant, and I went out there just to see how great this was going to be. And out of 22 homes, all of them had 6 steps to get in the front door. The only place I was going to Asian place was the garage, because I could get in the garage, and that was it. There were steps from the garage into the home, and all of the bedrooms were on the second floor. So, I just hope that maybe we can enlighten some individuals in our great Commonwealth about the easiness, attainable, that we can do some of these features for, and that it's not exorbitant cost. So again, thank you all.
Right, thanks to both of you. Now Adrian Bush will review legislative updates and the Kentucky Legislative Housing Task Force.
Okay, I'm standing up just because I need to stand up. All right, I am Adrian Bush, and I'm here to present an update on the Housing Task Force that was established by the General Assembly. So the first bullet talks about the purpose, about studying and reviewing the current and future policy needs of the state to address access and availability of housing. And it has met monthly since June. And the first meeting was June 24th. And actually, when I was doing the slide deck, sorry, the next meeting was October 21st, which was yesterday. And it was a jam-packed agenda. And so one of the things that I appreciate about our General Assembly and its partnership with KET as well as its own staff is that they always make these meetings available and accessible live and during the fact. So you can come to Frankfurt, and you should, because it's a delightful place to be. But if you can't, you can always check it out again online. Next slide. So these are the members. It is co-chaired by Senator Robbie Mills from Henderson and Representative Susan Whitten from Louisville. And it has been, people have really different areas of expertise and experience. And so it's been cool to kind of see it come together in terms of the questions that they ask and the topics that are discussed. Next slide. Okay, so some of the themes that we've captured have been just that we have a shortage in both small and large communities. Our senator and our representative well know that the housing shortage is not just a Louisville problem, not just a Lexington problem. That's part of why they're here. But I think it has been kind of eye-opening for some folks who haven't followed housing and homelessness as much as we do. Another topic that has frequently been brought up is the need for flexible funding. We just spent the first part of this meeting talking about the consolidated plan and HUD funding. And that was a very dense presentation, if you will, in part because of all of the strings that are attached to federal funding. I am appreciative of our General Assembly of the leadership back in the 1990s in creating our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, in dedicating a permanent funding stream for it in 2007. And we need more of that, that type of funding. Also, I want to note the Rural Housing Trust Fund that the General Assembly created in the 2023 session and funded again in the 2024 session to respond to the needs presented by the tornadoes and the floods in 21 and 22. So the more types of products, or if we could all align around one product that the General Assembly could create and fund, I think the better off we will be. There needs to be a link between economic and infrastructure initiatives to housing to address current and future supply gaps. So Senator Smith was talking about the infrastructure needs that were laid bare by the floods. And that is a very extreme example, and it is very real. But even in some of our communities that are just struggling to add more housing, we have land. It's not necessarily developable easily without some infrastructure, thoughtful infrastructure put into place. And we are happy to do all kinds of things for out-of-state corporations to bring additional jobs up here. But if we could think deliberately about linking that economic development with housing development for the people who will work at these jobs, that would be helpful. Planning and zoning reform repeatedly comes up just because your mileage may vary so much across the state, as the folks who develop in this room will tell you. And I'm trying to think, from yesterday's meeting, it was great because I think they were trying to get like all of the information in for the last meeting before the recommendations are issued on November 12th. So we heard from folks in Louisville, we heard from folks in Paducah. As David said, Wendy did a great job kind of re-level setting for the housing task force, as well as presenting options from other states like Oklahoma, Montana, Indiana, things that they have done to address the housing shortage, both current and future. So the next meeting will be November 12th. It's the day after Veterans Day at 1 o'clock. So if you have anything to say to the folks who are on the other slide with your ideas, now's the time to contact them by email if you're a constituent, or call them or text or run into them at the grocery store. And they can use the task force recommendations to inform legislation in the upcoming short session beginning in January, or in the 2026 legislative session as well. We have seen the General Assembly kind of use this task force to legislation conversion in a couple of key areas, other policy arenas. So, and I think that's it. What's the next slide? It might just be my contact info. Or it might not even exist. Okay, great. Happy to take any questions.
Adrian, why do you think the task force was formed?
So I think a couple of things have converged. We have seen with the disasters that happened in 2021 and 2022, just a renewed interest in housing and how we do it in rural Kentucky. Also, we are seeing, and this is unfortunate, but as an advocate, I never want to waste a crisis, that housing is becoming more unaffordable for more Kentuckians. We are seeing double-digit rent increases, again, not just in Louisville, not just Lexington, but in smaller communities. And there is just a growing recognition of how fundamental housing is to other policy areas, education, economic development, health, overall well-being. And so we had asked, actually, Representative Bridges from Paducah had filed House Concurrent Resolution 68 during the session to establish this housing task force. The House passed it. Senate, I don't know what y'all were doing, but I'm just kidding. It was good. It was a good enough impetus to get it started that the legislative leaders at the May LRC meeting decided that they wanted to have this task force as one of the task forces that met during the interim.
I'm curious, when you look at that list of the members on there from the outside looking in, why do you think they didn't put anybody from the rural areas on that list?
Well, we have Senator Higdon. I wouldn't call him from being in an urban area. I think it's a little bit Louisville heavy. And I do think part of that is because Louisville is our biggest city. And because people kind of remain focused on that. So, I mean, if I were at the drawing board, which I clearly am not, I probably would have tried to have it be more geographically diverse. But
just to follow up, I mean, when I did the Affordable Trust, Housing Trust, and when we looked at it, Louisville and Hazard, that region there were the ones that really seemed to have the best structure for capturing those dollars. So we've worked on this before, and in that budget cycle, again, because of the need that we saw during the flood, of course, I amended the entire budget, at least tried to, and added an amendment on the floor to try to put the money in for housing. Of course, I didn't get a second for it, so I died on the floor, but I feel like that may have shaped the members on that committee to some degree, but it needs to be fixed because there's a lot of those battles that we're fighting down there that now have kind of taken the lead on their own because of what's happened with the flood and the fallout. So while we do share a lot in common as far as need with Louisville, we're fighting a lot of completely different battles now. But just when you put it up there, it's kind of stark, but there's not those regions, all those counties, there's not even one even House member that's put on there. And that's something that we as legislators need to probably go back and revisit now that the time has passed.
well, and I also, I think it has been helpful because elements of what the Housing Task Force have been talking about and discussing have shown up in other committees during the interim. So the Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity had a lengthy presentation from Zach in part, and the Habitat in Lexington, because there was the $10 million towards that project, but I think it was helpful for the folks on that committee, because it is different, to hear, okay, this is what this investment means for our project. This is what this project means in terms of the scope of the issue statewide. I felt like you all did a good job of framing that. And then trying to think with some of the other committees, I think local government has been dealing a lot with housing, and that's who they have actually charged with staffing the housing task force, which in some ways makes a lot of sense. So as far as the trying to make sure that we are meeting both urban and rural, that's something that I wrestle with every day. As the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, we're not the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Lexington, for example. And that is, I keep coming back to this flexible funding piece that, you know, the General Assembly has had, you all have put in products like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, like the Rural Housing Trust Fund. Those are proven models. Like Kentucky has punched above its weight in terms of drawing down federal dollars, using that matching power of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But also the scope of the problem has grown so much that we may need to be looking at a different product, something that is larger, has more of a revolving loan fund capability, but that can be easily accessed by Louisville and by our folks in Hazard and our folks in Bowling Green. I think the beauty of the trust fund and the way KHC has administered it is that sometimes I think the perception is that all the resources go to Louisville. You know, Louisville gets there first, if you will. And I think KHC has done a good job as a statewide entity of making sure that we are getting those resources as we have them to all of the congressional districts, to as many senatorial districts and as many representative districts as possible.
There's got to be some education there though in the rural area because the resources are not there to do the things that needs to be done. And then some of the people that are there that could make the situations better view public housing and low income housing as it has a stigma attached to it.
Sure.
So there's this whole gap that's there that's never brought to the table. And part of my time of being here is I've always advocated there needs to be somebody that just looks at some of the issues that exist in a rural area. And not every rural area is the same.
Just to wrap this all up, and this happened, I think a lot of us probably followed this, that when this task force was put together, the understanding in the Senate was, and I can't speak for the House, was that there was no need to put the money I was requesting in because there was no place for it to go. And so there's this big, you know, just misunderstanding, I think, on the Senate side that we already had groups into place that were pulling federal, state, and other forms of revenue together, working every day, the Housing Alliance being one of them. But for some reason, the Senate just struggled with the fact that they did not realize that this was happening. And so they wanted to do a task force. And I will say that's caught up to us right now as the cold weather's creeping in. And you talk to Scott Reynolds and these guys, we're behind right now. So, I mean, they desperately were yelling that we can handle this money right now. And for all of us that work in housing, that's passionate about it, we knew that mechanism was there. I will say that a lot of the members then that were on the other side of the argument have come around because they've gone to the ground. They've seen for themselves that, yes, we were very capable of handling that influx of money back then. So we can't do anything about spilled milk, as they say, but now at least I think we have gained that much ground, that the support is there for the funding. We try to get this last session, but we were really promised that all this federal money was going to be released. And we were told, if you remember, that's going to be available almost immediately. And that's just not happened. So I hate to see it because you still have a tremendous need for housing there, and people have left the region because they couldn't wait it out any longer. So I do worry about long-term effects in those areas. I can't speak to Louisville, but I think the delay is really going to have a tremendous impact that we're going to see for years to come.
I agree, and just to underline your point, with the Rural Housing Trust Fund, which was at first 20 million for disaster recovery, 10 for West, 10 for East, that got passed in legislation in March. We got those funds committed in October to nonprofit partners with proven housing experience, HDA being one. Because they're state dollars, they can move really fast, they can be pretty nimble, and we spent a bunch of time talking with our partners to make sure we didn't create a rule that would make it too hard for them to serve folks and get the work done. That's just the beauty of flexible state dollars versus your federal dollars that are just laden with more regulations.
And I think too, there was we hear $298 million, but my God, that's a lot of money. And that was the amount from the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Grant for Eastern Kentucky. But with that, when the Department for Local Government did their needs assessment, like they acknowledged there's still this housing gap of at least $70 million alone. And so I think sometimes we want to think like we got this major grant. We want the federal government to pay for things if they will. We don't want the state government to, if the feds will take care of it, but there was a significant housing gap, and there remains so today.
Do you think that Senate or House Bill 5 played a role in who was on the committee and the fact that it was so urban centered? The legislature said you have to have encampments run by the it was an acknowledgement there were big problems.
I think yeah, if you look at the chief folks who put forward House Bill 5, they were all from Louisville. There were 7 of them, and Representative Whitten was one of them, and she is co-chairing this task force. She was also the one who sponsored and actually saw House Bill 100, the no cost birth certificates for people experiencing homelessness. She was the one who saw that through, and is now law and being implemented. So I do think, and even in talking to some of the folks, like we did roundtables this summer across Kentucky, and some elected officials were there, and they'd say, well, but that legislation was for Louisville. And then like, but that legislation was passed by the General Assembly. So it is in effect statewide. But even after passing it, there seemed to be some misunderstanding.
Just to see what the recommendations are. The hearings were good. Yes, and I do think the rural areas, our problems are big. I mean, we're near to Louisville, but I know that when we have someone we can't shelter, we look everywhere to try to find shelter, and we're not finding it.
Right.
In Kentucky or Tennessee or all the way to Florida.
Right.
So it's just an urban problem everywhere.
Yes. I hope to see strong recommendations for increasing our permanent housing stock. But also, I would like to see something around our crisis response system, our shelter infrastructure as well, because right now we are pretty much dependent on the feds for shelter, to the extent for HUD funded shelters. We have programs like yours that aren't even
We take no government money.
right.
We're
We're dependent on
yes,
on the feds and private donations. And if the state wants to have a role in homeless policy, we do think that it would make sense to at least match what is coming in from HUD for emergency shelter. I would argue that is not enough to shelter the folks that we do have. So we need to look at maybe like a 4-to-1 match, but it's not that much, I promise, because we're only getting like $3 million for the entire state. So I'm talking like $12 million. Zach?
Adrian, do you anticipate that there will be any specific policy recommendations that come out of the task force, or?
So typically we we worked some on, there was a task force on severe mental illness a few years back. And we were very interested in establishing recuperative care for people experiencing homelessness, to receive services. Because what was happening was folks who were homeless were discharged from the hospital onto the street or in shelter when they really need to be in like a mid-level, not the hospital, not the nursing home, definitely not the street. The reason I bring this up as an example is just to say that was one of the recommendations for the severe mental illness task force. And then later the next session, Senator Alvarado, who unfortunately decamped and left us for Tennessee, he actually championed Senate Joint Resolution 72, which directed the Cabinet for Health and Family Services to apply for a Medicaid waiver to do just that. So it takes time and it takes diligence on the part of stakeholders, but it is my hope that we can see something productive come out.
They did make a point in a couple of the task force meetings to say that, you know, their goal wasn't to actually have legislation or bills come out of the task force, but hopefully the recommendations will be weighty.
Yes. I will say, I echo, did you get a chance to tune in yesterday at all?
Yeah.
Okay, it felt like, I agree with Wendy's assessment, that it felt like, especially because they were coming up on the penultimate meeting, that they might be feeling a little bit more pressure to come up with some tangible recommendations and potential legislation. And again, it's our job as advocates to kind of push and make sure that things move along.
As far as homelessness goes, I mean, in general speaking here, with all the millions of people that have come in the country illegally over the last few years, how can we expect to stay ahead of that, you know, and make progress toward homelessness? You know, improving the homelessness.
Sure.
Is that even a realistic goal as long as we have open border, basically?
So I think, I mean, this question, questions around this theme have come up a couple of times throughout the task force with our immigration policy and such. And I'm not going to stand here and claim to be an immigration policy expert. I know homelessness, I know housing, I know Kentucky. But I think what we do have is good data around who is coming into our homeless response system across the state. And we don't see those systems like intermingling, if you will. We don't see an influx of folks who are undocumented coming into our shelters or anything like that. I want to say, like, right now we know that our shortage is a conservative 200,000 homes, both for sale and rental. If we do nothing, the shortage will grow to 279,000 homes. And I don't want to let paralysis around a national issue like prevent us from doing things in Kentucky to take care of our folks. So I have a definitive answer for you.
Even there were two homelessness providers, one from Louisville, one from Paducah yesterday, who talked about the data in their homeless response system database about the county of origin, or the last place people had a permanent home of the folks they're serving. And it was like 85% of the folks they're serving lived in the same county when they last had a fixed home to live in. So it wasn't a whole lot of people from even outside the county, let alone another state or, you know, from across the border, at least for those Kentucky providers.
At this time.
Yeah, I think.
But, you know, housing has been provided for a lot of these folks by the federal government. So once that housing is no longer provided, will we see an influx, you know, will those numbers change? Longer term down the road, I can't help but think that would be a huge problem. Obviously, if you're trying to stop the flow of water, you leave the water turned on, it's probably going to be a problem.
Adrian, I think what both of you just just said, were the people being served who come for help. My county, our charity also runs a medical clinic for uninsured people. And in the summer, we've seen an influx of new patients, 65 in one day. But we are seeing an influx of new residents without any insurance. And I don't think they don't come to us for shelter.
Right.
They don't go a lot of places for shelter because that's the danger. So the fact that they're homeless in our county is still true to you.
I agree. I think we're going to see that catch up later on. But right
They're
now-
not coming for services.
I think, I mean, Representative Bridges had asked me a question. He had sent me an email before the meeting and had asked because he was hearing stuff, you know, kind of bubble up in his role as House Local Government Chair. And I said, if you can like point me in the right direction, like I do want to know what is happening. I don't want to stand here and be like, well, we don't have a problem and this is perfect when it's not. I do think, especially the housing shortage numbers are dynamic. We do need to be thinking about growth and population increases and the number of units that are needed. And figure out what the state levers are, and then let the Congress hopefully figure out what their levers are.
I just wonder about data sometimes, and then as the flood was ramping up in late summer, I had a lady show up she was a veteran from Afghanistan up to the airport. And you know who she is, but I'm not gonna mention her name, but she had a list, and just to make it short, there were 387, I think what she said, veterans that were on some sort of medication before the flood. Something either like PTSD or something other to help them as far as like maybe a mental illness, and to regulate that. Only 87 of them had been tracked down after. This was like 4 months after. So she was taking it upon herself to go and try to hunt these people down and find them, which I thought was honorable, but very scary for her. I mean, you go up on somebody's property that's been without water, whatever, they, you know, have all kinds of frustrations and not taking their medicine. And so I looked into it with other agencies and nobody was looking for this. They were aware of the number, but I guess they just had to somehow find their way back. But this young lady was literally read still to this day. She's in Eastern Kentucky. She tracks down any lead she gets from BMW clubs and stuff like that. I don't know how many she's found, but that's a number that's always haunted me. I just always think about that there's numbers that we don't have a full account of what still happened to us, but that's mental health and housing and a private individual who just simply has a connection through having served with these men and women wants to go find them, but we're not doing it. So I do think that's when somebody had asked earlier about what we could do legislatively is to really dig into our numbers, and from whether it's going to be flood zoning to finding the people that actually still do need help and make sure those numbers are legit.
Yeah, definitely. Didn't mean to take up that much time. Glad there was a good discussion.
You're on the agenda for a reason.
Okay. Thanks, Adrian. Now we have Wendy.
Yeah, we've touched on a lot of the stuff that I was going to share, so I'll move through it pretty quickly. In part, I want to make sure you all are aware of our phase 2 data set for our housing supply gap analysis. I'm not going to go over a ton of it, but just highlight a few things. And then just a few updates about what KHC has been doing around the supply gap.
Good to advance. Let me see if I can.
Next slide.
Let me see if I can let you do it. You want to take control, I'll just make it best.
Well, whatever this is, right? Not me, but this.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Here's the big dog.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, I didn't do that. You all did that.
Oh,
Sorry.
I did that. Okay, well then I'll just keep doing it.
Well, that's fine. So I just want to, this is kind of getting the slide that's getting at what we're all talking about, which is if we had more housing.
going.
If we had more housing supply, we would see at least an alleviation of a lot of issues, if not radical improvement. So if we had more units across urban and rural areas to meet our gaps, we would have lower average housing costs, higher home ownership, we'd have more workforce housing, lower eviction rates, fewer homeless Kentuckians, and increased household stability. And I've said this before, but I just want to underline, in KHC's view, the housing supply shortage is the most urgent housing issue for Kentucky. Next slide, please.
I think we have tried it.
Okay, so we released recently our phase 2 data for the housing supply gap analysis. You all might remember in April we released phase 1, which was what's the current gap in Kentucky county by county for home ownership and for rental across different income ranges. We then had our analysts, Bowen National Research, do phase 2, which was a 5-year look forward informed by jobs that are coming to Kentucky that have been announced, migration within Kentucky, into Kentucky and out of Kentucky, also housing construction pipelines, because there are parts of the state that are building a lot of housing, to make sure we factor that in. Next slide, please. So in April, our current gap was estimated by Bowen National Research at 206,000 units across the state. The September gap analysis, which is basically that 5-year look forward. So what will the gap be in 2029 if something doesn't significantly change around the pace of our construction? The gap will then grow to 287,000 units. Next slide, please. So this is the current gap. The 2024 housing gap, that 206,000 units. And what's hard to see from here, but that is every column that is color-coded represents different income ranges, the red being our lowest income Kentuckians and the blue being our highest income Kentuckians. And then the top row is for rental, the bottom row is for homeownership. And so what we see is that this gap is pretty evenly spread between rental and home ownership needs. And for rental, the need is most significant among lower income Kentuckians. The need for home ownership units around the state is pretty evenly spread across different income bands. We have the need for home ownership units at many different income ranges. Next slide, please. These same trends pretty much hold for the 5-year look forward. That we are going to need more rental for lower income Kentuckians, and the home ownership is going to be roughly spread across many income levels, some slight changes in there, but pretty similar trends. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to try to, this is so detailed, it's hard to see. I do want to make sure you all know all of this is available online. The presentation that we gave at the task force yesterday is available online. So you can get some really, really nitty-gritty detail about this. You can get the full report. We have webinars, all that kind of stuff. These are the sheer numbers of the housing gap, and the darkest colored counties are where the gap is the largest. This is sheer numbers, so it's not going to be a surprise that Louisville, Lexington, Northern Kentucky, and kind of the I-65 corridor, you know, Bullitt, Hardin, Warren counties are really where you have the largest numbers. The next slide, however, shows the gap in terms of the number of units that is the gap as a share of the housing units in that county, right? So it's the relative gap. And what that shows is a very different picture, which is that for many counties, the gap in units needed represents a pretty significant, in some cases, 20% of the current units in that county. And that it is not just an urban issue, it is very much an urban and rural issue. And even counties where you might not think there's a lot of economic growth happening, they still have a significant need for more units because we have not been building units, because units are going offline if they were hit by natural disasters, or they're just kind of falling into such disrepair they're not habitable. There might be short-term rentals like Airbnbs. There might be outside equity investors buying up properties. That's really significant in Louisville right now, probably Northern Kentucky as well. So there are different reasons that units get removed from the available supply. And so this is showing again, that gap as a share of the county's own housing units. Next slide, please. So this is very hard to see, but what this is showing is the availability of rental housing county by county as a percentage of the rental units in that county. You like to see 4 to 6% just to have enough slack in the rental market for people to move in and out, move to something larger, move to something smaller, stop being a homeowner and become a renter, what have you. What you're seeing, you can't see it very well, is that many counties have far less than even 1 or 0.5% rental vacancy. And again, you want 4 to 6 just to have some slack in the market. So what I'm trying to get across is there is a painful lack of available rentals. And who loses out when that happens? It's the folks with the least resources. So it might mean they have a disability. It might mean they're just extremely low income. It might mean they have an eviction on their record, which makes it really hard to get rehoused. It could mean they've got substance use disorder or some other issues that are mental illness, but they're the folks least likely to win out when there's this level of scarcity in the rental market. Next.
What does the pink mean?
I'm sorry, go back. Those are the ones that have the least availability. Where in terms of as a share of the rental units in their county, there is the least availability of housing. Next slide. This is just showing you broken out by the types of rental. I can't express to you how big this data set was that our market analysts looked at. They surveyed over 1,200 rental properties across Kentucky, representing over 100,000 units. So they really tried to capture a big and representative across a lot of counties. So what they found is for market rate rentals, the vacancy rate is 3.4%. Again, you want at least 4% to have enough slack in the market. For tax credit properties, which are rent and income restricted, but not rent subsidized. So they have to remain affordable and rent to lower income people, but they're not rent subsidized. That's an even lower vacancy rate, 2.4% vacancy. If it has a subsidy, like public housing, Section 8, or some other rent subsidized union, 0.6% vacancy, which basically means none. There's just about none, which gets to what David was speaking to of just people not being able to get into a Section 8 or public housing. Next slide, please. This is the availability of for sale, so homes to be purchased. These are sheer numbers. You can't see them very well. They are very low numbers. And the availability, so only 6,000 homes for sale across the entire state. The availability as a share of homeownership units in Kentucky is 0.5%, less 0.5% availability of for sale housing. And the median list price was almost $280,000, which is not affordable for a lot of Kentuckians. Next slide, please. This is that share of available for sale housing as a percentage of the units in that county. Again, trying to show it relative, not just as sheer numbers. And again, where you see pink is where there's extremely low availability of homes to purchase. It's very low across the entire state, but particularly low in those areas. Next slide. And what I want to get across is that the lowest kind of band of homes priced at $200,000 or less, or just under $200,000, about 30% of the homes fell into that category. However, even 200,000 is really too high for a lot of households. And within this band, we're also talking about a lot of homes that might be marginally habitable. They might need significant repair. They might be quite aged. So there's really a lack of those affordable and decent quality, let alone energy efficient homes. Next slide, please. This is actually a table from the Chamber of Commerce report that came out in June or July. It's a great companion to our report, and it's really where the Chamber and the Home Builders Association of Kentucky came out with a report to talk about housing issues and how they are impacting or could impact Kentucky's ability to grow economically and to continue to attract jobs. What you're seeing here in light blue are actual housing starts based on housing permits, single family and multifamily over time. It starts in 95 and then it goes until 2007, 2008 when it really tanks. And then you'll see the light blue going forward never really rebounds to those pre-08 levels of construction. The dark blue line that's pulled forward after 08 is the average level of construction that happened in Kentucky before the 2008 housing crisis. So if we had just stayed on average, next slide, we would have built those homes. Those homes did not get built. This isn't the only driver, but this is for the nation and for Kentucky, a key driver of our housing supply gap, which is after 08, some gears got pulled out of our housing production system and have not gotten back into that system. So many small and mid-sized home builders went out of business. And I always say, because I took this from a woman in our county whose husband used to build homes before 08, she said, over my dead divorced body, will he ever be a home builder again? Because they just about lost everything. It was really traumatic for them, right? And so we as a state and as a nation, so this takes you from 08 to like 23, I think. So if you think about our study that carries forward to 29, it's not just what's happening right now. It's not just the pandemic. It's not just interest rates. It's this long-term under construction that's been going on. Next slide. So again, that is part of what this number can seem really gigantic when we project forward to 29, but when you think about that representing 20 years of under construction, it's not so amazing. In addition, we have household formation where households are smaller than they used to be. We have more elderly households, divorce creates households, people are living in 1- and 2-person households at a higher rate than they used to. Next slide. So while that is the biggest factor, the lost builder capacity, and likewise, when you don't have builder capacity, you're not going to have a construction workforce because they have to have jobs and activity to work at, right? That goes together. We also have the natural disasters, which robbed us of many, many units, either majorly destroyed or totally destroyed housing units in East and West Kentucky, and other smaller natural disaster and weather issues that are taking units offline. We've got economic growth that is creating a lot more demand. Talk to anybody in Hardin County and they'll tell you how concerned they are about the coming blue oval jobs. We've got zoning and land use issues that in some parts of the state make it very difficult to get more construction done. That's not everywhere. My county, my city, I live in Lebanon, Kentucky, where Senator Higgins from. We have zoning, but our county doesn't have any zoning. So it is an issue. It's not the only issue. Local resistance and NIMBYism, not in my backyard, is an issue. Short-term rentals in some parts of the state are pulling units offline and they're not available to house somewhere permanently. Outside equity investors in some parts of the state are buying up inventory. We have very little construction of starter homes, of workforce housing, and what's called middle housing, which is that duplex, triplex, quadplex, where you get more density on a lot, but it's not radically changing how a neighborhood looks. High interest rates are currently exacerbating all of this. Escalating insurance costs tied to weather and climate issues is also making it hard to afford for home buyers, but also for landlords to continue to afford their insurance. It's be really difficult. And then we have slow delivery of units to market, meaning most of what we do is still stick building, and that takes a long time, right? And we need to add to that manufactured, modular, panelized, other ways to get units to market. Next slide. So I just want to make sure that you all know all of our data, webinars, raw data. You can go to the next slide. It's all available on our website. You can even get your county's chart of that, like the gap for different income levels for renters and homeowners. It's all available. This is the current for Madison County. If you go to the next slide, it'll show you the 2029 number for Madison County. I presented to them because they need to be worried. Their number is about to triple, and they've got a lot of projected growth. Next slide. You can also get the raw data. Many area development districts and other folks have told us they're pulling this data to do grant applications, to show a bank or an investor that they need housing. And so it's all available. It's totally free. We're trying to make it as publicly available as possible. Next slide, please. You can also get your calculation of the gap for your county, like how we got to that, how our analysts got to that. That is in the appendix of the report. Next slide, please. Okay, and so just a few other updates about what we're doing around this supply gap issue and trying to push the message. Next slide. I'm not going to go through these bullets, but we cannot tell you how many Partners that we don't typically partner with, and that don't use our funds necessarily, have come to us and wanted to talk about the supply gap, wanted us to present at their conference or meeting and have some discussion about what role they might play with it. It's been overwhelming in a good way. Next slide, please. We presented to the Housing Task Force that Adrian updated us on twice, and our CEO was on a KET panel about the housing supply gap. Our conference, also, you can go to the next slide, had several sessions. We presented the phase 2 data, but we also did sessions about zoning, about middle housing, about what other states are doing to address their supply gap. So we are really trying to push this issue and kind of solutions from KHC. We also will be competing. We're trying to get as much additional funding as we can for Kentucky. Whenever more housing choice vouchers are available, we go after them. We will also go after $7.5 million in what's being called Continuum of Care Build Funds. It's the first time we've had access to dollars through the homeless HUD programs to build housing for people experiencing homelessness. So we're going to go after that. And then we recently won $8 million in what's called HUD 811 money, which is project-based rent assistance, either to put into existing properties or properties under construction to house people with non-elderly people with disabilities. Basically, just to buy more affordable housing across the Commonwealth and make it rent subsidized. And then again, yesterday we presented to the task force what other states are doing. I'm not going to make that presentation. I'll just share with you the key highlights of it. I think I just have one slide on it. Next slide. Here's what we're seeing other states do. And I will say it does appear that a lot of other states are a little bit ahead of us in taking action around housing supply. Some states are looking at land use and zoning incentives or mandates. So some states are preempting local areas and forcing some zoning and land use changes. Some are, instead of doing that, incentivizing it. If you want some state funds for housing development, you must also adopt more flexible zoning. So we're seeing both tactics. We are also seeing most states, and every state around us has some form of a state housing tax credit to run alongside the federal housing tax credit to build low-income rental housing. In addition, Ohio is doing a housing tax credit for homeowners. The biggest kind of new bucket that is taking many different shapes across the country is states creating funding and financing for housing infrastructure, so roads, water, sewer, electric, and or for the construction of housing. And a lot of times it's for middle income housing, workforce housing that can be inclusive of low income, but it's not just for low income housing. It's really an effort to get more middle income housing and workforce housing into their housing supply in a lot of cases. There's sometimes an affordable vein with it, but it's often not exclusively for low income residents. That might be, and I will just say the flexibility of state dollars just can't be overemphasized. It makes such a huge difference. And so we are now seething with envy of these other states that are coming up with local, with state sources to get supply going. That's all I had. I welcome any questions if y'all have them. But again, all that's on the website. You can get access to any of it at your leisure.
Thank you, Wendy. Does anyone have any announcements or information?
So Louisville Metro is advocating the Department of Housing, Buildings and Construction to change the Kentucky Building Code. They have held a couple of hearings. The next one is actually on the 24th at 9 a.m. Virtually. So they're looking at moving to the 2024 IBC and then the 2024 IECC Energy Code, which currently it's at 2009 for residential. DHBC had looked at, was beginning the process of updating the code anyway, but Louisville's kind of pushing their hand on this a little bit faster. So, some changes there. And then We, Kentucky Manufactured Housing Institute, we have our Louisville show again in January. And so we're going to be doing the advocacy reception like we did this past year, and that will be on January 21st. So I'll send out some info on that as we get closer. And then lastly, talking about zoning, we've been partnering with the city of Versailles over the last year, serving on a task force to update their planning and zoning as kind of a proof of concept. And the way we're going about it with this city is we're placing a home there, a manufactured home that will be a permanent residence. And it will be open for about 6 weeks for community members to walk through and see that it's not the big bad wolf of a mobile home that people think that it is. And so that home has moved to the lot. It will be the permanent foundation, the footers are complete, and it will be in the drive by the end of this week. And then the goal is here probably 3 weeks or so to have a ribbon cutting ceremony and have that be open. So make sure that you all are invited to that as well.
That's great. That's an interesting tactic. I like that.
Anyone else? All right, are there any suggestions for agenda topics for the next week?
I'd like to make a suggestion, I'm with Community Action. We got involved in this through the Weatherization Advisory Council that was merged into this council, and it's been a great experience. But what I've seen is a fall off of discussion regarding the weatherization program within this merged group, and it doesn't need to be every meeting, but I would like to see occasionally some updates regarding the weatherization program.
I feel sure that's gonna happen at the next meeting, just based on my conversation with Kelly recently.
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? All in favor?